Earth Factor Asia with Lorraine Hahn.
On this episode, saving our rivers. Welcome from the banks of one of Asia's greatest rivers, which, like so many other waterways here, is facing the combined impact of climate change and human development. Known around the world as the Ganges, here in India it's simply Ganga Maya, or Mother Ganga. As Rob McBride reports, it's relied upon by literally millions of people for their very existence.
First light over the Ganga. And as they do every morning, throngs of the faithful are drawn to its waters. Here at Varanasi, far down its length, where the river has settled into a gentle meander, the banks attract the largest numbers of devotees. Considered the living embodiment of Hinduism, millions come to the river to worship. They come to wash themselves, to wash their clothes, even their animals. But all this intense activity often takes place right next to outlets discharging raw sewage. For with all of her religious significance, the river also serves the more mundane function of carrying away the vast amounts of sewage and industrial waste generated by the cities located along its length. It also disposes of carcasses, both animal and human. And just downstream, the main sewage outfall turns the brown river black. A film of filth settles on its surface, bubbling with methane, making this part of the river a highly toxic soup. Incredibly, this is also where one fisherman chooses to place his net, hoping to take advantage of the greater fish numbers drawn to the nutrients in the water. Even so, Subhash tells us, it still takes him all day to get a catch worth taking home. The pollution of the Ganga has long been recognized by agencies, both local and national, as a pressing problem. But a solution has so far proved elusive.
We have all possible technologies to take care of the river, but still the rivers of the world are not clean. And here there is an example that people have so much love and faith for the river, but faith and love alone cannot do the job.
Dr. V.B. Mishra has campaigned for the past 25 years to clean up the Ganga. As a civil engineer and also a Hindu high priest, his approach to the problem has been a unique combination of faith and science.
If I were only a scientist, I will just run away from her. And if I were only a committed and devoted person to Gangaji, I will fight with anybody who says that Ganga is polluted. But this is our strength, we combine both.
To prove how polluted the Ganga has become, the organization he founded began regular testing at intervals along the river. They have shown up the inadequacies of government efforts to clean up the pollution. A traditional sewage treatment system which was installed often fails because of a lack of power to drive its pumps. The plight of the Ganga has led to calls for a major rethink on how the country deals with pollution of its waterways.
We cannot clean our rivers the way the Americans cleaned up the Hudson, or the Germans cleaned up the Rhine, or the Brits cleaned up the Thames. And it is our inability to understand that we don't have the money or the technology to be able to keep investing into treating sewage. So really a country like India, and I believe this is going to be a challenge for most of Africa, for most of us, who will require to reinvent the way we do pollution control. It is too expensive, it is perhaps too ridiculous for us to be able to do it the way the rest of the world has done it.
But what concerns campaigners is the more fundamental threat to the river posed by climate change. For as satellite images show, the glaciers that feed the Ganga high up in the Himalayas have been suffering alarming rates of decline.
The broad estimate is that about 40% of the flows in our northern rivers comes out of glacier melt, which only means that we as a nation will have to become far, far, far more careful in the use of our water, which also means that we will have to use every drop of water as if it was our last.
The prospect of the river shrinking by up to a half is a crisis for a society that considers it its spiritual soul. To visit the Ganga at least once in your lifetime is a sacred belief of all Hindus. At the end of a life, to have your ashes brought here and then scattered on these waters, that's about as holy as it can get. Having his face and head shaved as a traditional sign of mourning, Pavan Kumar has just arrived in Varanasi from the neighbouring state of Jharkhand on a holy mission. As the sun comes up over the river, he produces the ashes of his father. A short ceremony and then a trip by boat out into the slow Ganga current for his father's remains to be taken by the waters.
This is what my father would want. Coming to the Ganga means that you will have a good rebirth into the next life. It's important.
At intervals along the river, especially at this place near the heart of Varanasi, the funeral pyres burn day and night. If they live close enough to the river, families will bring the bodies of deceased relatives for cremation. But so revered is the Ganga that the sick and old are sometimes brought here from far away to await death. Overlooking the pyres and subjected to the constant sounds and smoke of cremations, this so-called traveller's guest house offers accommodation for those willing to wait months, even years, just to be sure of a cremation on the Ganga. All of these acts of devotion inadvertently add to the pollution problems, but they confirm the river's indispensability in the psyche of the nation. But for literally millions of people who live along its banks, the river is the very source of life itself. It feeds a water table essential for agriculture. The village of Kotubam, like so many others in this rich farming belt, relies upon the water drawn from the ground for its crops. Rice is one of the staples here. With 4 children to feed, Gauri Devi knows the river's importance. It's essential, she tells us. Everything comes from the river. At risk from climate change, at risk from the very people who worship here and rely upon it for their existence. Campaigners who have proposed various low-tech and low-cost solutions have still gone unheeded.
The pain and suffering which I have when I look at the river and when I go to her, I know that this could be helped, this situation can be solved.
Here on the mighty Ganga's upper reaches, the water cascades clean and cold from the Himalayas. The river is relatively free of pollution, but it faces a very different set of challenges. The town of Rishikesh in the Himalayan foothills is famous for its ashrams and guest houses, welcoming visitors from all over India and abroad. Many come here on a spiritual quest. That's interesting, huh? But ever more tourists are being drawn by the fast-flowing waters and stunning scenery above and below the town, especially from India's growing and affluent middle class. They come to camp along the banks of the river. And more people from India's overcrowded cities are deciding to make their visits more permanent, either moving here or investing in weekend getaways. Up and down the river, housing developments are appearing, with developers promoting the virtues of owning your own piece of paradise, close to this revered river. It's all part of a growing trend of urban expansion, with people who can afford to leave behind India's bigger cities choosing to do so. Satellite towns are spreading outwards from centres like Delhi, and Jaidev Singh is among those looking for his dream home.
it was all farming land, but now you can see everywhere there are buildings, and so it won't be any problem. Most of the big malls are coming nearby, hardly a kilometer drive, so it's very easy to stay.
Do you see a trend of more and more people following in your footsteps?
I think 90% of the people following this step.
Increased affluence is fueling this new urbanization, prompting intense debate at national conferences like this one on how to deal with the environmental pressures those expanding towns are creating. Is the government doing enough?
There are substantial programs for the river Ganges. There are programs, but it's a question of full awareness being there among all the people. I mean, I as a citizen should be aware of the fact that I should not be throwing waste into the river.
Even if the impact of the new developments can be controlled, the arrival of newcomers provides a real irony. In trying to escape the increasingly unbearable North Indian summers, they are seeking a refuge along a river which itself now appears to be threatened by the same global warming. While India's rivers are increasingly at risk, so are China's. A very different country, but the glaciers that feed its rivers are just as vulnerable to climate change. As Jim Laurie explains, China's water concerns go all the way to the top.
The roof of the world, the largest and highest plateau on Earth, about 4 times the size of Texas. A harsh, arid land of ice and glaciers where Asia's major rivers begin. But the fragile balance in this once pristine environment has been put under threat by climate change. According to the UN, these glaciers could disappear by 2035 as temperatures rise, causing first floods, then droughts. The environmental group Greenpeace, one of only a handful of international NGOs allowed to operate in China, conducted an expedition to the area in 2005. Greenpeace believes the repercussions are far-reaching.
The melting of these glaciers because of global warming would put hundreds of millions of people under the threat of water shortage.
Greenpeace toured the source area of the Yellow River. Towering above the plateau is Everest, but even the best-known glaciers on the tallest mountain in the world cannot escape rising temperatures.
Since the 1960s, all 3 glaciers have been retreating, and the speed of their retreat accelerated in the 1980s.
Tibetans living in remote villages on the plateau say their traditional way of life has already been affected by the altered weather patterns.
Now, the winter is as hot as the summer. There is no ice. The weather change is obvious. I'm worried about the future.
China's biggest future challenge? Clean drinking water for all. It's been adopted as the highest priority for China's State Environmental Protection Agency.
There are nearly 300 million people in rural areas who don't have clean water to drink. That may be a rough estimate, but it shows the scope of the problem. A large number of people in remote areas do not have access to clean water, and that is why water and water safety is our #1 priority.
And with the need to protect the rivers to provide safe water comes another potentially conflicting need: electric power. Since 1993, China has been building the largest hydroelectric dam in the world near the Yangtze River's 3 gorges. Now nearly complete, the dam is to produce nearly 1/9 of what China needs to power its economy. But green groups say the impact on water quality and on people displaced from flooded lands could be monumental. Facing such criticism, an alternative. Some power companies are turning to more environmentally friendly, so-called run-of-the-river projects, small dams along the course of the waterway.
Run-of-the-river has the beauty that it incurs less environmental damages to the local areas because you are building power stations along different levels of the river. So different parts of the river can release different parts of the energy itself. Comparing with a big-scale hydropower project, where if you want to build a big dam, more often than not, you will have certain impacts to the local environment.
In a remote part of northwest Guangdong province, a run of 11 stations provides power to local communities while causing minimal disruption to environment and villagers.
The water is flowing from the west vessel or this pipe, which is connected to the turbines which drives the electricity generators upstairs, and that generates electricity.
And while the power produced is small compared with large dams, it does mean remote communities can have electricity.
In dry seasons like this, typically 1 megawatt of hydropower will be able to generate or serve approximately 1,000 to 2,000 households in the rural area of China.
A clear benefit to people and environment.
People are still burning firewoods for their kitchen and other household applications. By providing them with clean, renewable energy, they will be able to save a lot of wood. They don't need to cut the trees. They can, use the fuel more efficiently than before. It will be win-win situations for everybody involved.
Understanding how China's river systems work and how to manage them properly is vital for future water supplies. And I'm on my way to meet a man who knows more than most about the water challenges facing the country. Embarking on an exploration career soon after China opened up to the outside world in the 1970s, Wong How Man is a photographer turned geographer who has traveled extensively to the most remote corners of this vast country. Through the years, he's established himself as an authority on the geography of China, in particular, the inaccessible Tibetan Plateau.
Well, if you look at this China map, almost 1/4 area is the Tibetan Plateau. And all the glaciers, snowfields are within this 1/4 of it. And from this plateau starts many of Asia's greatest river, be it the Yangtze that comes out here, the Yellow River, and then the Mekong, the Salween, the Irrawaddy, the Ganges, Brahmaputra. So this is like not only the backyard of China, but the backyard of the rest of Asia.
Right, and there are millions further down that rely on these rivers. Their livelihoods rely on these rivers, right?
Yes, certainly. If you're just talking of the Yangtze, you're talking of about 200 to 300 million people that lives in this drainage area, let alone like the Mekong, which is international river that cuts through 6 countries. So certainly this is not only the concern of China, it should be the concern of the rest of Asia and the world.
You've been involved with these rivers for many years. Tell me about that.
Well, I think, as a geographer, I'm fascinated by these great rivers. And as a byproduct of this geographical work, it came to our attention that the climate changes are also extremely important that affected the upstream of these rivers. It's also fed by all the glaciers.
In his earliest travels, he was aided by satellite images of the glaciers he was exploring, images that 30 years later reveal significant depletion. And with even more sophisticated satellite imagery available to anyone through the internet today, the damage is clear for all to see.
That used to be much larger. You can see
the shadows.
The shadows. You can see every single one has been receded and at accelerated speed.
No doubting the severity of the problem, but arguably China's best-known explorer is also one of its most optimistic supporters. Is there something that you think is being done that's on the positive side of all of this?
Well, if I look at China's younger generation that are educated, be it high school or college, I think I tend to be optimistic. I think they are all aware of the situation. On the one side, they are more affluent. On the other side, they are all also far more aware of environmental issues. So overall, I think the future generation will take things in hand in a much better way than this generation.
In trying to reach a younger generation in China, young Chinese themselves are increasingly taking a lead. On Earth Factor U, we meet one woman in Shanghai who's taking a grassroots approach to environmental advocacy.
I'm Zizi Zheng, and I'm the operations director for the Ganga Institute in Shanghai. Roots and Shoots is a program which we bring to the school. We set up an organic garden in the school, and the students, they take turns to go into the garden to take care of the vegetables. They turn the soil, they pick the worms.
Here we are at Qingpu High School. This is one of the schools involved in Roots and Shoots organic garden program.
They love the organic garden program because this is something they have never done before. These are children of the single child generation, so they probably don't do any housework at home. If you ask them where food comes from, they probably say, from any supermarket in Shanghai. Well, Shanghai has certainly changed a lot. I can just walk in the street in a week's time and don't recognize any of the buildings. And this is my city. I grew up here. Shanghainese people, they're known for being very practical. They want to make things work. People want to change. People want to change for the better. There will be a time for people to transfer this vibrancy into environmentalism.
This is Slice Daddy. It's a deli chain in Shanghai that takes the produce from a school garden and sells it to the public.
This is the message actually we want to send to our students. You start today. You start with yourself. Then you tell your friends, you tell your parents, you tell your teachers to follow you. It's not difficult. I'm not saying that everybody we work with, every single student is going to be an environmentalist in the future. That's not necessary. We don't need that many environmentalists in this country or in this world. But once they have this sense of responsibility, when they grow up, then they'll say, I want to do something that my children's children will not blame me for. I'm Zizi Zhang. It starts with us.
On this series, we like to look for the positives. So we end with a story from Seoul in South Korea on what can be done when a community gets together to clean up its river.
It starts as a symbolic trickle across a pedestrian area in downtown Seoul, and quickly builds into a cascade of water that provides pleasure for the people of this city and inspiration for the residents of others. Known as Cheonggyecheon, it's come to take pride of place through the heart of Seoul.
Cheonggyecheon is very nice name. It's clean valley water.
But the river that used to exist here was far from clean, and it wasn't much of a valley either. In the aftermath of the Korean War in the 1950s, the area was little more than a squatter settlement.
They used this area as to taking a shower and also doing the laundries. And then there was a lot of social problems because the people who live around this area were poor.
The solution seemed simple: cover over the river with a road. In fact, two roads.
They thought the best solution was to cover it. So we covered from late 50s, and we also built elevated highway over the covered road from late 60s.
Completely covered, the residents of Seoul could be forgiven for forgetting that a river had ever run through it. Then, in a bold move, the decision was taken recently to uncover and restore the waterway.
Today, a prosperous city, Seoul has decided to spend some of its wealth on itself, creating this green space that all of its residents can enjoy.
The transition wasn't easy. Thousands of shopkeepers and businesses living nearby had to be convinced. And then there was the question of what to do with the 170,000 cars every day that normally drove through here. Now a focal point for regular cultural events and a big draw for visitors from across Korea and abroad, all those objections seem to be forgotten.
Removing all those type of those roads and then providing some of the natural settings. And we are able to witness some of the wildlife coming back in the river and also some of the birds.
What's more, solving the so-called heat island effect has seen the average downtown temperatures drop by several degrees, and the city can breathe again.
Having these streams with the water and also the open space will allow the wind to travel, going through. So obviously there will changes some of the temperatures and also the air pollutions.
Come lunchtime, and the throngs of workers from nearby offices come to enjoy their break. On most days, Hyun Kim and her friend Young Yun can be found here.
I'm spending my lunchtime here, and it's very good to be here to have a fresh air. And it's not easy to have this environment in the city, So it's very good for the citizen.
On the nearby roads, the city traffic moves from one congested intersection to the next. But here on the river, the only congestion happens on the stepping stones. An ironic transformation for a society that has largely made its wealth on the production of automobiles.
Everybody thinks a car is more important than the people. This congestion restriction project is a big turning point. The center of the urban management is the man, not the cars.
And where Seoul has led, other cities are now following.
Seoul is a leading city in Korea. So when you cover the river, so every city followed us. They covered their stream as well. But now we restored our stream, so they followed us. So they started their restoration works as well.
And that's it for this edition. From the Ganga in northern India, I'm Lorraine Hahn. We'll see you next time.